Welcome to the podcast, Let the Prophet Speak. Today we continue studying the prophet Ezekiel, and we go on to Ezekiel 41. Ezekiel, the Navi Yechezkel, is still discussing his vision of his walk through the Beit HaMikdash, his walk through the third temple, that God is showing him through this third temple. God brought him to Jerusalem and started showing him through the building, and he's been vividly describing the images that he sees as he walked from room to room. I have been comparing Ezekiel to a mystic who uses the image of castles and rooms in order to go from room to room, each one within which he or she achieves a closer level to God, achieves accomplishments as he gets higher and higher towards the highest levels of heaven. And we are following Yechezkel as he goes through this process and as he describes the third temple in this way. This is the approach that I've been using because we get the impression that he's not actually giving us instructions for building, because even though there's a lot of measurements, if you look at these measurements carefully, you start to see that they don't really make sense. They don't work as an architectural guide, but you get the idea that you're ascending in levels of holiness. You're ascending in levels. You're bringing in. He's including only people who are bnei tzadok, people that have tzidkut, righteousness. Those are the only priests that are there. He's getting rid of chatat. He's getting rid of sin. He's getting rid of the olot that are brought, the sacrifices that are burnt on the temple, because one has to rid themselves of his impurities and wash them and rinse them of his impurities. These are images that we had last time. Today he's getting closer and closer towards the Holy of Holies, and he is being led by this malach, by this angel, the angel who shines like copper, who is showing him around and showing him the measurements of the building. And today we're going to see some images from which Ezekiel is going to learn some lessons about approaching God and at how we get closer to God. So let's see. Vayevi'eni, this is verse 1 in chapter 41. Vayevi'eni el ha'heichal, and God brought me into the heichal. Over here it's actually not God, it's actually the angel led me into the heichal. Now the heichal is the inner holy part of the temple. So he went from the ulam, which is the vestibule that leads into the heichal. Inside the heichal is where the bread, the shulchan, where the showbread, and the menorah that was lit, and the small altar for incense, the golden altar for incense, was in place, and it is immediately before the Kodesh HaKodashim, the Holy of Holies, within which is the Holy Ark. So Vayamad he brought me into the Heichal, Vayamad et ha'elim, and he measured out the elim, the supports, sheish amot rochav mipo, 6 amot, 6 cubits wide here, v'sheish amot rochav mipo, rochav ha'ohel, and 6 cubits wide there was the width of the ohel. The ohel is also called the tent because in the tabernacle this was a tent, it was the ohel moed. The rochav ha'petach eser amos, the width of the doorway was 10 cubits, v'kisvot pesach, and the shoulders at the sides of the doorway were chamesh amot mipo, v'chamesh amot mipo, 5 cubits here and 5 there. V'yamar okar bo'em amo v'rochav eser mama, and the entire heichal was 40 cubits long and 20 cubits wide. Uba lifnima, here's the key, and he brought me into the inner room. Vayamad, presumably from the ulam, he showed it to me before, now he brought me inside. So Yechezkel is himself ascending this level. Vayamad el ha'petach shtayim amos, v'ha'petach sheish amos, v'rochav ha'petach sheva amos. And he measured the supports of the door, or the jamb of the door, was 2 cubits, and the doorway was 6 cubits. And the width was 7 cubits. Vayamad et arko, and he measured its length was esrim ama 20, v'rochav esrim ama pnei heichal, and it was 20 wide along the face of the heichal, of the holy section. Vayomer Eli, and he said to me, Zeh kodesh HaKodashim, over here, this part, this is where the Holy of Holies lies. So he's almost into the inner room. Vayamad kir habayit sheish amot, and he measured out, the wall was 6 amot thick. 6 amot tall, v'rochav hatzela arba amot saviv saviv l'bayit saviv, and the width of the wall was 4 amot surrounding the entire building. V'hatzelaot, and the side chambers, tzela al tzela, one above the other, were shalosh ushloshim. There were 33 chambers, presumably in the walls. Pa'amim u'ba'os ba'kir asher l'bayit latzlot saviv saviv. All around, they were one after another. They were projections like holes into the wall, liot achuzim v'lo yiu achuzim b'kir habayis, so that they were designed to support and hold up the wall, but they wanted those supports to be within the wall as opposed to within the house. So, and now we're about to read verse 7. V'rachva v'nasva lemala lemala latzelaot. The winding passageway of the chambers on the side of the building got wider as it went higher and higher along the sides of the building. Ki musav habayit lemala lemala saviv saviv labayit. Because there was because the building itself got wider and wider as you went around the building. Al kain rochav labayit lemala. Therefore, the width of the house on top, v'chein tachtona yala al ha'alyona latichona. It was this how you went from the bottom to the top through the middle by walking up these passageways. V'ra'isi is, I know this sounds a little confusing, but I mean there are books that have tried to study and work through each and every one and draw diagrams and imagine what exactly it is that he's saying. But I think it's more important for us to just imagine ourselves being led through this building and all these passageways and hallways and so on and so forth, and just imagine that this is an ascent, getting closer and closer to reaching God, where the rest of the world is more outside, separating oneself from the distractions and difficulties of the world around as one goes deeper and deeper inside until one reaches God. V'ra'isi, this is verse 8, labayit gova saviv saviv, mustos hatzlaos. I saw that it was surrounded by a raised up pavement, melo hakone, sheish amot atzila, which was the foundations of the chambers on the side were elevated about 6 amot, 6 cubits was its height. Rochav hakir asher latzila, the width of this pavement, which was on the side, el hachutz, on the outside, was 5 amot, 5 amot, v'asher munach beit tatzlaot asher labayit. Uvein ha'lishachot, and between the chambers, rochav eser amos saviv labayit saviv saviv, was a width of 20 amot all around the house. Upetach hatzela, and the entrance to this side chamber, la munach, which was for that platform where one could walk. Pesach echad derech tzafon, one entryway was facing the north, Pesach echad l'darom, and one towards the south. V'rochav mekom hamunach, and the width of the place where one could walk is 5 amot saviv saviv, was 5 cubits all around. Now, the habinyan asher al pnei hagizra, and the structure, the building which is in front of the empty space. It's interesting, this word gizra, I compared it to the Eretz Gezerah, the empty space where the scapegoat was brought. And in Ezekiel, interestingly, on Yom Kippur, it uses that same language of gizra to refer to empty space. So within this building, there's these buildings and rooms and stairways, and very soon we'll see the decorations and stuff, but also there was gizra, empty space, which he's using that same term. And remember, this is occurring on Yom Kippur. I think there's some significance to that, the significance of the empty space. Pe'at derech hayam, which was on the western side in the corner, rochav shivim amma, it was 70 amot wide, v'kir habinyan, and the wall of the building was 5 amot rochav saviv saviv, yarkot shemama, it was 90 amos long, and it was all around 5 amos wide. Umadadat habayit orach mea amma, and he measured the entire Length of the temple was 100 amot, v'hagizra in the empty area, v'habinya in the built area, v'kirotea in the walls, oroch mea amma were also 100 cubits. V'rochav pnei habayit v'hagizra l'kadem mea amma, and the width of the front of the house and the empty area facing the east was also 100 amot. Umadad orech habinyan, and now he measured the length of the building al pnei hagizra asher al charel mipo mea amma, from each side 100 cubits, v'heichal hapnimi, and the inner temple, v'ulamei hachatzer, and the vestibules of the courtyard. Hasipim v'hachalonim ha'atumot, the thresholds and the windows that were closed, v'ha'atikim, and the ledges, saviv l'shlashtam, that were around them, neged hasaf, sechif eitz saviv, were overlaid with wood all around, v'ha'aretz al ad hachalonos, and the land up to and from the ground up to the windows, v'hachalonot mechusos, and the windows themselves were covered, presumably also with wood. Al me'al ha'pesach, extending above the door, v'ad habayit hapnimi, all the way to the inner house, v'lachutz, and outside, v'el kol hakir saviv, and the entire wall all around, v'apnimi, on the inside, uvachitzon, and on the outside, midos, were all a pattern of measurements. So these are the measurements. In verse 18, which we're about to read, we're going to read a little bit about some of the images, and we're going to learn some interesting lessons from these images. Now, what was this pattern? What was this pattern that he saw all over the walls? And this is going to be very telling. The asui kiruvim v'timorim. The pattern over all these walls was made out of kiruvim, cherubs, v'timorim, and palm trees, date palm trees. V'timora bein kruv l'kruv. There was a cherub and then a palm tree, and a cherub and then a palm tree. Ushnayim panim lakruv, and each one of the cherubs had two faces. We know that the cherubs above the Aron, above the Holy Ark, were a pair of two, so it makes sense that the cherubs would have two faces, and then between each was a palm tree. There's a lot of symbolism about a cherub, what it means, what it demonstrates, and a lot of symbolism about a palm tree. I'm going to go out on a limb, pun not intended, and explain that a cherub, the image of a cherub, is the image of a child, the image of innocence. An innocent child is an innocent human being. Human beings can relate to God on a level of innocence. In other words, a person who is just good, sweet and good, like a child. In a typical situation, hopefully a child is living in a loving family. The child has not yet suffered the stresses and difficulties of the real world yet. And the child has this innocent love, and everyone loves the child because the child. And this is one relationship that the people of Israel have, and the people of the world in general have with God. A relationship on a level of innocence. A relationship on, we're just deep down perfect, beautiful people. However, then we go through life, the harsh life. A tamar, a date palm, also is an image with a lot of meaning. But when we think, one of the most important places we find is in Psalms, where it says, Tzadik katamar yifrach, a righteous man blossoms like a date palm. What does it mean to blossom like a date palm? A date palm is a tree that grows in a harsh, dry environment. It can be in a desert, it can be in a difficult, hot environment, but it also gives fruit to a person in the desert, sweet, delicious, moist fruit in the harshest of environments. The date palm represents the growth, the tzaddik katamar yifrach, how a righteous person can go through the trials and tribulations and difficulties of life and still be a tzaddik and still grow tall like a tree and give beautiful fruit. That's the opposite level. So there's the innocence with which we relate to God and with which we can create love with God, to God and to each other. But then there's the difficulties that we go through, but we remain faithful, we remain solid, and we grow despite them. This is the image, the flipping image between a kruv, a cherub, and a date palm. The innocence versus the the one who has made it through trials and tribulations. And then on the date palm, there's also two faces. And these are the two faces that one has during when one achieves that level of growing through difficulty. Ufne adam elatimorami po. On this date palm, on one side was the face of a man. Ufne kefir al timorami po. And the face of a lion on the date palm on the other side. Asuya kolabayas aviv saviv. This is the decoration all around in the house. The man represents the person who manages to tame to utilize for good the resources that he has in order to make the date palm grow. And the kefir, the lion, represents the challenges of nature that a person has to contend with. And nature means animals, and it means the fields, and it means all of that a person has to contend with. But he can make it. But if he does it right, he can grow a beautiful date palm and make something beautiful out of it. It also references all of the difficulties we have to live with in this world, which can be represented by nature, but it could be represented by each other, it could be represented by illness. These are the challenges that we all have to live through and face. And if we face them well, then through the trial of difficulties represented by the kfir and the living up to those challenges represented by the face of the man, we can grow a beautiful date palm even in that type of environment. Me'aretz, as verse 20, Ad me'ala pesach hakruvim v'atimorim asuyim. They were built, this decoration of the date palms went from the floor all the way to the top, both the cherub decorations and the palm decorations, asuyim. The kir ha'echol, and regarding the wall of the hechol, of the holy hallway, of the holy portion of the temple, ha'echol mezuzas ruvuah, it had squared 4 doorposts, ufnei hakodesh hamare kamareh, and the front of the Kodesh, the one facing the Holy of Holies, it had an appearance of something, some kind of incredible appearance, which he doesn't describe yet what that appearance was. But he is describing what's in the room and what's facing the Holy of Holies, which is the next room. There's something there to see, but he's not describing it yet. HaMizbeach, within the room, we said already, is the altar, which was made out of 8 wood, sholosh amos gova, which was 3 amot high, v'arko shtayim amos, and it was 2 amot width, u'miktza'osav lo, and it had corners, the archova kiros of 8, and it was built mostly out of wood. Vaydaber elai zeh hashulchan asher lifnei Adonai, and the angel told me, this is the table before God. This is, as we know, the mizbeach of HaKetoras, the altar of incense. There were 2 doors that led into the Heichal and towards the Kodesh, which we are discussing now. There's the doors had doors. Whether it means there's 2 levels of doors or it's some kind of folding door is unclear. There were 2 doors on one door and 2 doors on another door. It sounds like some sort of a folding door with 2 leaves. And on the doors, we also have the same decorations, the cherubs and the date palms, just like they were decorating the walls that we described before. And then there was a thickness of wood which ran along the outside of the vestibule, the ulam, which led into the room that we're describing. And there were windows that were framed and closed, and again, the images of date palms on each side, al kisvotu ulam, on the sides of the vestibule, v'tzalot habayit, and on the side chambers that we discussed earlier in the chapter, v'ha'ubim, and on the lattice work of wood that we also described. This ends chapter 41. You can try to read it yourself and try to develop the images in your mind. I hope I conveyed to you as we continue this mystical ascent towards closer and closer towards the Holy of Holies, which in this chapter was pointed out to him, this is where it is, and we were told that there's a mar'eh kamar'eh, an appearance like an appearance. But Yechezkel did not describe what exactly that appearance was, but something astounding, some astounding vision of Kodesh HaKadoshim, of Holy of Holies, which presumably we are going to discuss as we continue in this ascent towards the closest possible union with God that a human being can have. Thank you so much for studying chapter 41 together. Looking forward to studying chapter 42 and the rest of this wonderful book of Ezekiel together.